Thank you for joining us. This PowerPoint presentation and the accompanying narration was created for East Texas Baptist University for the course Criminal Justice 3314 Criminal Investigation, and I'm Dr. Eric Hillman. The textbook that we use in this course is Criminal Investigation, 11th edition by Hess, Orthman, and Cho. When you watch this video presentation, it is expected that you use this to supplement your reading of the textbook and not simply to replace your reading of the textbook. This is Chapter 5D, Fingerprint Principles. Chapter 5 has been divided into several sub-chapters or segments in order to allow for easier online viewing and easier online uploading. It is assumed that before you view this chapter 5D that you've already viewed and taken notes on chapters 5A, 5B, and 5C. At the end of chapter 5C, we talked about the Rubis technology and how it used ultraviolet light to detect latent fingerprints. The most common method of detecting latent fingerprints, at least on non-porous surfaces, is fingerprint powder. When we say non-porous, we mean a surface that doesn't absorb water or liquids. An example of a non-porous surface would be a hard, flat surface, like your computer screen, or like a glass that you would hold water in. A porous surface, on the other hand, would absorb water. An example of a porous surface would be paper or unpainted wood. So let's talk about detecting latent prints on non-porous surfaces, surfaces that do not absorb liquids. An example of a non-porous surface is a surface that's hard and non-absorbent. Glass, mirrors, tile, painted wood, because when you paint the wood and the paint dries, then that piece of painted wood no longer absorbs liquids. And when you have these non-porous surfaces, the preference is to develop fingerprints by the use of fingerprint powder. The fingerprint powder that you see in the picture is black, and almost always crime scene investigators use black powder to lift prints from non-porous surfaces. However, fingerprint powder actually comes in several different colors. Here, the black works very well on a white surface, and as you can see in the picture on the right, this fingerprint examiner is developing a fingerprint. A latent, invisible print is being developed by the application of fingerprint powder and a fingerprint brush. If the surface was black, it might be better to use white or light gray powder. However, the black is most common. Generally, this powder is made out of some form of carbon, and gray would be the second most common, and that often is made from aluminum dust. You've seen super glue in the stores. It's actually pretty cheap now. You can go to the dollar store and get a package like you see here for about $1. Super glue is made up of a chemical called cyanacrylate ester. This is a chemical that interacts with and visualizes latent fingerprints. And so, super glue is actually a secondary use, is used to lift fingerprints. You may not have known that. Criminalists have developed a process called super glue fuming to help develop latent prints. And again, this is on non-porous surfaces, metals, electric tape, leather, plastic bags. So how does that work? First of all, the super glue is heated up to the point where it's changed into a fume. In this case, they're trying to lift fingerprints from a Pepsi can. So they have a super glue fuming wand, which heats up the super glue into a fume, and then they spray the fume on the object they want to develop prints. that will usually develop a latent print. And since this superglue is light, white or almost white in color, it will then produce a latent print that's also white or very light in color. Superglue fuming can use a wand or it can use a chamber. In the picture on the far left, a gun has been placed in a superglue fuming chamber. The superglue fume is inserted into the chamber and it develops any prints that might be left on the gun. In the picture on the middle, a bicycle is placed in a very large superglue fuming chamber. Superglue is fumed, sprayed on the bike, and then the bike is examined to see if any latent prints have been developed. In the picture on the right, you have a beer can. What is that, a Coors can? And you can see this Coors can is gray in color, having been sprayed with superglue, cyanacrylate ester. The superglue then forms on the can, reacts with the fingerprint, and produces a white residue. And there's your fingerprint. Sometimes, instead of black or gray powders, a criminalist will use a fluorescent powder. The advantage to using fluorescent powders is that you can use lasers or high-intensity light sources, also known as alternate light sources, such as quartz halogen lights, xenon arc lights, or Indian arc light sources, and this will cause the fingerprint, the developed fingerprint, to almost glow in the dark. So fluorescent powders can be used. These fluorescent powders come in many different colors. This one happens to be green, and you can see how on a dark surface, black fingerprint powder may not show up well. So this criminalist chose to use a green fluorescent powder, and with an alternate light source, you can see that fingerprint shows up very well. What about porous surfaces? So again, porous surfaces are surfaces that will absorb liquids. And as we said, paper would be an example of a porous surface. Well, when you're trying to find prints on a porous surface, papers, cardboards, cloth, generally you're going to have to treat that material with a chemical rather than a fingerprint powder. So let's talk about some of the chemicals that are used to lift fingerprints from porous surfaces. One of the oldest methods, originally very popular, is called iodine fuming. Iodine crystals are heated until they become vaporous, and when they combine with the latent prints, they make the prints visible. Iodine fuming was one of the original chemical methods, and it was very popular a few years ago. The problem with iodine fingerprints is that they're not permanent, and so when the iodine settles on the print and develops it, you need to photograph that print immediately, because in a few minutes that fingerprint's going to fade. Because iodine fingerprints fade, the process of iodine fuming has lost popularity in recent years. Whenever you see a fingerprint that's developed by iodine fuming, it often has this goldish color to it. A more common chemical that's used now is called ninhydrin. That reacts chemically with trace amounts of amino acids present in latent prints to produce a purple-blue color. So when you process a latent print with ninhydrin, you end up with a purplish color print like you see in the two pictures on the right. Currently, ninhydrin is the most common chemical method used. So again, these chemicals are used on porous surfaces, surfaces that can absorb liquids. Ninhydrin, the most common, often the first one used, the first chemical of several different possible chemicals you can use. Another chemical is called physical developer. This is a silver nitrate-based reagent. It's used to develop prints when other chemical methods have not worked or have been ineffective. Physical developer has also been found to be useful for developing prints on objects that may have been wet at one time. Perhaps a paper has been touched by the suspect and then the paper has been left out in the rain, etc. Physical developer has been handy in those situations. So, which one of those three should you use? And if you do use all three, which order should you use them in? If you're going to use more than one chemical, it's important to use those chemicals in a certain order. If you're going to use iodine fuming, normally you would do that first. Then you would treat with ninhydrin. It doesn't mean you have to use iodine fuming. It just means that if you're going to use those three chemicals, you've got to use the iodine first before you treat it with ninhydrin. Remember, ninhydrin is the most common and most popular chemical treatment to lift prints. And then you would apply physical developer last. It's very important to use physical developer last if you use it at all. Now, if an object is small enough to be transported without destroying the print on it, you could actually take the entire object. That envelope could be put in a Ziploc bag, for instance, and transported to the crime lab for processing. That glass could be either processed at the scene or it could be transported to the crime lab. You don't want to transport any object unless you know that you can transport it in such a manner that it does not disturb the fingerprint. Before you attempt to preserve the fingerprint, you'll want to take a close-up picture of it. As you recall, we talked about different kinds of lenses when we talked about photography, and you could use a macro lens to take a close-up picture of this fingerprint. And the reason you take the picture first is the macro lens will pick up most of the detail of the print, and then if you accidentally lose the print while you're trying to develop it, at least you have a photograph of it. If you have a large object like a wall or a car, generally you have to develop that fingerprint at the scene. After you use your fingerprint dust, and again, probably 90% of the time black fingerprint dust is going to be used to lift fingerprints. In the case on the left, a person on a white object, and I don't know what that white object is, let's assume it's a white car hood. And the criminalist or crime scene investigator has developed several fingerprints on that white car hood using black fingerprint powder. He then can use wide tape. Now this is like Scotch tape, like invisible tape, but much wider. You can actually buy this more expensive forms of this tape at crime scene investigator stores, but you can even go to Walmart if you need to and just get packaging tape that can be used for this purpose. Since the picture on the left there's several prints, this crime scene investigator is going to lift all the prints at once using a wide tape. They also have single lift tape. In this case, the type of tape that he's using is sold in crime scene investigator type stores or online. Specifically, used to lift one print at a time. Once the print is lifted, the tape goes down on the print. The tape then has the fingerprint powder stuck to it. You then lift that print and then place it down on a solid white background. The 3x5 or 4x6 index cards that you see for sale at Walmart or Office Depot or any office supply are often used as fingerprint cards. So once you lift the print using the tape, you then apply the tape to a clean white index card, and your print is permanently preserved. Digital imaging. Once you have that print and it's permanently preserved on, for instance, a 3x5 card, you can then put that 3x5 card into your APHIS technology machine, and it does something called digital imaging. It takes the actual picture and it converts it into a digital computer file. And so, for instance, of the 3 prints you see on the scene screen right now, the picture on the left may be the actual fingerprint that's lifted from the crime scene. The computer then creates a digital image of that fingerprint, which is what you see in the center picture. It's going to darken the ridges and lighten the valleys. So that makes it easier to analyze. And in the third step, the computer then is going to pick out the minutiae, the ridges, the ridge endings, the bifurcations, etc. Since most fingerprints that are lifted from crime scenes are not in perfect condition, this process of digital imaging can enhance the print and allow for more accurate and comprehensive analysis. So that's the advantage of modern technology, both hardware and software. In the digital imaging process, most software has what's called a compare function, where 2 images are placed side by side. The APHIS instrument then compares the 2 images. First of all, by clarifying the image, and then by identifying the minutiae. And as you recall, there's about 150 minutiae per fingerprint. So this allows the computer to compare an unknown print. When we say unknown, we mean the print at the crime scene, because we don't know who left that print at the crime scene. So the crime scene print is the unknown. And it allows the computer to compare that with a known print. What is a known print? Well, that's a print where we know which person the print came from. So perhaps you have a suspect in jail. You take a fingerprint from the suspect. That would be the known print. You know where that print came from. And then you compare it with the unknown print, the print at the crime scene, because you don't know who left that print there. And the computer will compare, and it will, through process of digital imaging, clarify the print and then identify the minutiae for comparison. Now remember, the computer only makes a suggestion as to whether or not something could be a match. The final decision is always left up to a human being. And that's the end of Chapter 5D on fingerprints. Once you finish viewing this video and taking notes on it, I would encourage you to continue to Chapter 5E. Thank you and have a great day.